So, what did prehistoric language sound like? The honest answer is, we don't know. And we never will. Not for sure. There are no recordings, there are no written accounts. The sounds spoken by our ancient ancestors vanished into the air millions of years ago. And it's one of the biggest mysteries in human evolution. Language is made of breath and movement. It doesn't fossilize, but that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a detective story. Scientists from different fields, paleontologists, archaeologists, linguists, neuroscientists, are all looking for clues. They piece together evidence from shattered skulls, ancient tools, and the very shape of our DNA. They can't tell us the exact words or the specific melody of a prehistoric sentence, but they can give us a pretty good idea of what the building blocks were. They can tell us about the engine that produced the sounds and the brain that gave them meaning. The story of language isn't a single event. It didn't just appear one day. It was a slow, gradual evolution over millions of years. It probably started with something that wasn't language at all. Let's start with the hardware. Before you can speak, you need the right equipment. For humans, that equipment is a very specific set of tools, a sophisticated brain, a unique vocal tract, and finely tuned ears. Looking at the fossil record, we can see how this equipment was assembled over time. The brain is the command center. Modern human brains have specific regions that are dedicated to language. The two most famous are Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Broca's area in the front of the brain is involved in producing speech. It handles grammar and the physical movements of your mouth and tongue. Wernicke's area further back is all about understanding. It's where we process the meaning of words. We can't look at a fossilized brain. But we can look at the inside of a fossilized skull. The brain leaves an impression on the bone as it grows. These impressions are called endocasts. They're like a mold of the brain's surface. By studying endocasts from our early ancestors, we can see the rough shape and size of their brains and sometimes even spot the bulges where these language areas would be. Let's go back a few million years to the Australopithecines, like Lucy. Their brains were small, not much larger than a modern chimpanzee's. Their endocasts don't show much evidence of a developed Broca's area. Their communication was likely similar to that of other apes. A system of calls, grunts, and gestures to signal danger, find food, or maintain social bonds. It was communication, yes, but it wasn't language. It lacked the complexity, the grammar, the ability to talk about things that weren't right there in front of them. Then, around 2.5 million years ago, we see the arrival of the genus Homo, the first of our line, like Homo habilis, or handyman. Their brains were bigger, and their endocasts show a definite bulge in the area of Broca's area. This is a huge clue. Homo habilis was also the first hominin to consistently make and use stone tools. The process of making a simple stone chopper, choosing the right rock, knowing how to strike it to get a sharp edge, requires planning and a sequence of actions. Some scientists believe that the same mental pathways needed for tool making are also used for language. Both involve putting things in a specific order to achieve a goal. It's possible that the first whispers of proto-language began here. Not sentences, but maybe simple, distinct sounds linked to specific things. A sound for rock, a sound for hit, a sound for sharp. It would have been incredibly basic. The journey continues with Homo erectus, who appeared around 2 million years ago. These were incredibly successful hominins. They were taller, had much larger brains, and created more sophisticated tools, like the iconic Acheulean hand axe. These axes are symmetrical and carefully shaped. They show a level of forethought and skill far beyond the simple choppers of Homo habilis. Homo erectus also spread out of Africa and across Asia. Surviving in new environments and coordinating hunts for large animals would have required better communication. Their language, if we can call it that, was probably still very simple, perhaps a larger vocabulary of sounds. Maybe they could string 2 or 3 sounds together. Lion, run, now. Something direct and practical. So the brain was getting ready. But what about the vocal equipment? This is the other half of the hardware equation. The sounds of human speech are produced in our larynx or voice box, but the real magic happens in the space above it, the pharynx. In humans, the larynx sits much lower in the throat compared to other primates. This creates a large L-shaped vocal tract. The long vertical part of the L is the pharynx. This space acts like a resonating chamber. By changing the shape of this chamber with our tongue, we can produce a wide variety of distinct vowel sounds, like ahe and do. These vowels are the cornerstones of speech. They allow us to create thousands of distinct syllables and words. A chimpanzee can't do this. Its larynx sits high up in its throat, just like in a human baby. This is great for breathing and swallowing at the same time, but it severely limits the range of sounds it can make. So, A key question in language evolution is, when did our larynx drop? This is hard to answer because the larynx is made of cartilage, which doesn't fossilize. But we have a clue: the hyoid bone. The hyoid is a small U-shaped bone in the neck that supports the tongue and the larynx. It's the only bone in our vocal apparatus that isn't connected to any other bone. Because it's so delicate, it's incredibly rare to find one in the fossil record. But we have found a few. The most famous is from a Neanderthal skeleton found in Kibara Cave, Israel, about 60,000 years old. The Kibara 2 hyoid bone looks almost exactly like a modern human's. This was a bombshell. For a long time, people thought Neanderthals were brutish grunters, but this bone suggests they had the anatomy to speak. Their vocal hardware was in place. Further evidence comes from the base of the skull. The shape of the skull base can give us a hint about the position of the larynx. In early hominins, like the Australopithecines, the skull base is flat, like in apes. In modern humans, it's arched. The skulls of later hominins, like Homo erectus and Neanderthals, show a degree of arching that's somewhere in between. This all points to a gradual evolution of the vocal tract, moving towards the modern human setup. So if a Neanderthal had the basic hardware, what did they sound like? Some researchers have tried to model the Neanderthal vocal tract based on their fossil skulls. The models suggest their pharynx might have been a bit shorter and wider than ours. This means they could probably make most of the same sounds we can, but perhaps with a slightly smaller range of vowels. Their speech might have sounded a bit different, maybe more nasal or with less distinction between vowels like y and nu, but the evidence strongly suggests they could talk. Their language was likely complex and functional. The final piece of hardware is the ears. It's no good producing complex sounds if you can't hear the differences between them. The crucial frequencies for human speech are between about 2 and 4 kilohertz. This is where the subtle differences that distinguish consonants are found. Scientists have studied the tiny bones of the middle ear in fossils. By analyzing their size and shape, they can calculate what frequencies an ancient ear was best at hearing. Studies on Neanderthal ear bones show that their hearing was tuned to the same frequencies as ours. Their ears were built for listening to speech, so we have the hardware evolving over millions of years, a brain getting bigger and more specialized, a vocal tract changing shape to produce more sounds, and ears tuned to hear those sounds. But having a piano doesn't make you a musician, you also need the software. The cognitive abilities. This is the jump from communication to language. Language isn't just about making sounds. It's about symbolic thought. It's the ability to use a sound or a sign to represent something that isn't there. A word like river isn't the river itself. It's a symbol that we all agree stands for the river. This allows us to talk about the river that's a mile away, or the river we saw yesterday, or a mythical river in a story. This is what truly separates human language from animal communication. When did this symbolic leap happen? Again, we look for clues in the archaeological record. The first big clue, after tools, is the use of pigment. At sites in Africa, archaeologists have found chunks of ochre, a red mineral pigment that are hundreds of thousands of years old. Some pieces are scraped and ground, suggesting they were processed to make a powder. What were they using it for? Maybe they were painting their bodies. Body painting is a universal human practice. It's a way of signaling identity, group membership, or status. It's pure simple. You are using a color to say, I belong to this tribe, or I am in mourning. This is a language-like way of thinking. Then, around 100,000 years ago, we see the first clear ornaments. Shells with holes drilled in them, found in caves in South Africa and the Middle East. These weren't just pretty shells. Someone deliberately collected them, punched a hole in the same spot on each one, and likely strung them together to be worn. A necklace is a symbol. It says something about the person wearing it. It could be about social status, or it could just be about self-expression. Either way, it's abstract thought made real. The most dramatic evidence for symbolic thought, of course, is art. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet in Europe, dating back over 30,000 years, are breathtaking. These weren't just doodles, they are sophisticated depictions of animals full of life and motion. To paint a bison on a cave wall, you have to hold the image of that bison in your mind. You have to translate that three-dimensional, living creature into a two-dimensional outline using charcoal and pigment. This is an incredible symbolic act, and it's often linked to storytelling and ritual activities that are steeped in language. And there are burials, starting with the Neanderthals and becoming more common with early Homo sapiens. We see evidence of individuals being deliberately buried. A simple burial might just be for hygiene, but some graves are more elaborate. They contain grave goods like tools or animal bones. One famous Neanderthal burial in Iraq was found with clumps of pollen, suggesting flowers may have been placed in the grave. This implies a ritual. It suggests a belief about death and an afterlife. These are highly abstract concepts. It's hard to imagine how a group could develop and share such beliefs without a reasonably complex language. So the symbolic mind was developing alongside the hardware. The need to communicate more complex ideas, like how to make a better tool, or how to coordinate a hunt, or what it means to be a member of a group, drove the evolution of the hardware. And as the hardware got better, it opened up new possibilities for more complex thought. It was a feedback loop. Now we can try to put it all together and speculate about the sound. What did it actually sound like? Let's imagine a timeline. 3 million years ago, our Australopithecine ancestors would have sounded like apes. A collection of hoots, screams, and grunts tied directly to their emotional state: fear, aggression, excitement. 2 million years ago, Homo habilis, sitting around a campfire, might have used a wider range of sounds. Not just grunts, but maybe some simple consonant-vowel combinations. Think sounds like b, k, ma. These sounds might have been linked to specific objects or actions. Ka might mean stone. Ma might mean animal. They might have used pitch to change the meaning, like many modern languages do. Rising ka could be a question. A sharp, loud ka could be a warning. They would have used their hands a lot, pointing and gesturing to make their meaning clear. 1 million years ago, a group of Homo erectus on a hunt. Their communication would have been more effective. They might have been able to string a few of these proto-words together. Ma go there. We hit ma. Still no real grammar, just a sequence of ideas. The sounds themselves would have been clearer, more distinct, as their vocal tracts slowly changed. But their vowel range would have been limited. The sound of their speech might have been flatter, less varied than ours. Now let's jump to 100,000 years ago. A group of Neanderthals. Based on the evidence, they had language. They could talk about the past and the future. They could teach their children how to make complex stone tools. They could tell stories. What did it sound like? As we saw from the modeling, maybe a bit more nasal than our speech. Maybe with fewer distinct vowels. Think of languages today that have small vowel inventories. They make up for it with more complex consonants. Neanderthal language might have been rich in guttural sounds, clicks, or other consonants that we find in some modern human languages. It would have sounded human, recognizably speech, but perhaps with a different accent, a different cadence. Finally, let's consider our own species, Homo sapiens, around 50,000 years ago. This is when we see what's often called the Great Leap Forward, a cultural explosion. We see sophisticated art, musical instruments like bone flutes, intricate personal ornaments, and complex new tools. Many researchers believe this cultural boom was linked to the final development of modern language. The key innovation may have been syntax, not just stringing words together, but embedding ideas within each other. The ability to say, "The spear that I made yesterday killed the deer that was eating the berries near the river." This kind of recursive sentence structure allows for an infinite number of expressions from a finite set of words. The sound of this language would have been fully modern. The full range of vowels and consonants would have been available. Of course, the specific language they spoke would be utterly alien to us. All modern languages are descended from a language spoken much, much more recently, perhaps within the last 10,000 to 15,000 years. The language of 50,000 years ago is gone forever, but we can make some educated guesses about the very first sounds. Across all the world's languages today, some sounds are incredibly common. Vowels like a y and u. Consonants like dud, come, and. These sounds are common for a reason. They are acoustically distinct from one another, and they are relatively easy to make. The AA sound is made with an open mouth. The and U sounds are made at the two extremes of the vowel space. The consonants tant and kak are simple stop sounds made at the front, middle, and back of the mouth. The nasals and n are also simple to produce. It's a safe bet that the earliest true words were built from these basic, robust sounds. The very first word was probably something simple, like ma, or pa, or tada. It's no coincidence that these sounds are often the first ones babies learn to make, and they form the basis for words for mother and father in countless languages. There is also a big debate about how language started. Did it start with vocalizations or with gestures? The gesture-first theory suggests that our ancestors started communicating with their hands. This makes sense, we already gesture, and the part of the brain that controls complex hand movements is right next to Broca's area. The idea is that as communication became more complex, sounds started to accompany the gestures. Eventually, the sounds took over as the primary mode of communication, freeing up the hands for other things, like carrying tools or babies. The other main theory is the vocal first theory. This idea suggests that language evolved from the emotional calls of our primate ancestors. But instead of just involuntary grunts and hoots, our ancestors gained conscious control over their vocalizations. This school of thought often proposes a musical proto-language. Like, early communication might have been more like song. It would have been holistic, with pitch, rhythm, and melody carrying a lot of the meaning, more so than individual words. It would have been great for social bonding, for soothing infants, and for coordinating group activities. Over time, these song-like phrases would have been broken down into smaller parts, into words with specific meanings. In reality, it was probably a mix of everything. Early language was likely a multimedia experience. It involved the voice, the hands, the face, and the entire body, just like communication today. When we talk, we don't just use words, we use our tone of voice, our facial expressions, and our hand gestures to add meaning and emotion. Our ancestors would have done the same, probably to an even greater extent. So, to return to the original question, what did prehistoric language sound like? The slow, patient assembly of our humanity. For millions of years, it sounded like the calls of apes, echoing through the trees of Africa. Then, it sounded like a simple grunt gaining a specific meaning, a sound for danger that was different from the sound for food. Later, it sounded like a handful of syllables, spoken through a vocal tract not yet fully modern. The sounds were perhaps flatter, less resonant than ours, but they were used to coordinate, to plan, to survive. It was the sound of the first words, combined with expressive gestures. Then, it became the sound of the Neanderthals. A voice recognizably human, maybe a bit rougher, a bit more nasal, but capable of telling a story, sharing a belief, or mourning a loss. It was the sound of a true language, spoken around a fire in a cave, while the glaciers of the Ice Age loomed outside. And finally, with our species, it became the sound of poetry, the sound of a flute carved from a vulture's bone, the sound of a myth being told by flickering firelight, while images of the great hunt danced on the cave walls. It was the sound of a fully modern voice, attached to a fully modern mind, capable of asking the ultimate question, where do we come from? We can never hear those exact sounds. They are lost to time, but we can hear their echo. We can hear it in the shape of a fossilized bone. We can see it in the sharp edge of a stone tool. And we can feel it in the deep ancient grammar that is wired into every human brain. The sound of prehistoric language was the sound of us, becoming us. It was a process, not a single note. And it's a sound that is still evolving today.